Episode 33, Dark Dealings.
You are pathetic.
Ludwig von Kuppa hissed as he magically suspended Roy high in the air, so that the spikes on his shell grazed the vaulted ceiling. He clenched his fist, causing Roy to cry out in pain. All of the officers who had gathered in the room looked around nervously, while Larry snickered.
You know, I thought when we joined forces, you would be a useful ally.
Ludwig mused, pacing back and forth on the blue carpet.
But no. You allowed yourself to be humiliated, crushed by a second-rate hero who shouldn't even be alive. My disappointment, Roy, is infinite.
Ludwig released his magical hold on Roy, causing the huge Kuppa to fall from the ceiling and crash into the ground, cracking the tiles around him.
I am going to have to take a more direct role in this.
Ludwig continued speaking to himself, walking through a huge door into his vast control room. The officers and Larry followed him, while Roy continued lying on the floor. Ludwig reached his observation balcony and stared out at the huge hologram of the world, which was surrounded by several levels of balconies full of control consoles. He crossed his arms as he stared at the map, gazing at the territories that were under his control. The Sand Kingdom was lost now. If they moved fast they could reclaim some of it, but it was highly likely that it would be split up between the Neo-Empire and the Bowser loyalists. Effectively, Sector 4 no longer existed.
So what's the plan now, Ludwig?
Larry came up to him, placing his hands on the golden railing.
We gonna punish Fire Flower, or keep on fighting Dad?
Ludwig stroked his chin. Fire Flower had always been little more than a nuisance, but now that Luigi was back, things could get a bit more difficult. While he hated to admit that Luigi, who had always been the weaker brother, was making him nervous, it was best to take him into consideration. He was not Roy. Unlike his brother, who arrogantly trusted in his immense physical strength, Ludwig had trained every day, learning the most complicated spells in his vast library. He had trained physically too, honing his large body so that he could match even Morton in hand-to-hand combat. In addition to that, he would not allow any of his strongholds to be taken off guard like Neon City had. All he had to do was play his cards right. Even one of the Mario brothers would have difficulty dismantling everything he had worked towards.
We leave Fire Flower and Luigi alone. For now.
Ludwig replied, turning to Larry.
If we move to deal with them, our more crucial enemies could strike us when we are not prepared. We will move for an alliance with Wendy. Her army will provide extra manpower. And, of course, Larry, your spies will be critical for our next move.
Larry grinned.
Ah, I was hoping you would say that, big bro.
He exclaimed, clapping his hands together.
Just wait till you see it, Larry. These guys I've been training. They're nearly as clever as I am when it comes to that kind of stuff. Good.
Ludwig nodded.
I want eyes and ears in every castle, every battleship that still swears allegiance to our father.
He looked back at the huge globe, its blue light shining over the command center, which was still decorated with the ornate, classical style that Ludwig had used throughout his palace in the wooded Kingdom Mountains. His troops were slowly pushing into Sarasa Land and the northern Cremosphere. Once reinforcements consisting of his new airship Mk-3s and mass-produced Kuppa war armor arrived, they would fall to him. Sector 6, Lemmy's territory, was halfway under his control. The poor little brother of his had never been much of a fighter. His territories would be the first to pass to Neo-Empire control.
Prince Ludwig,
came a voice from behind him. Ludwig turned to see Krizina walking towards him, an impatient look on her wrinkled face. He involuntarily scowled. He was not in the mood to worry about his deals with 7 stars at the moment.
Ah, Krizina, my shining yellow star.
Ludwig drawled half-heartedly.
What business would you like to discuss today? No business at all, Prince Ludwig.
Krizina replied.
The purple star is nearly at your palace. If you do not greet him, it would reflect very poorly on our relationship.
Yes, yes, of course. Ludwig sighed, following Krizina out of the control room. As he walked down the tall, cold, gloomy halls of his palace, he thought with frustration about just how annoying this partnership was going to get. He did not quite care about meeting Krizina's superior, the Purple Star. He, in fact, did not quite care about speaking with Krizina anymore, either. First chance he'd get, he would announce that the partnership was over. However, now was not the time. He could still benefit from his partnership, and, with the loss of Neon City, he could very well need some new resources to compensate for the heavy blow against his organization. 2 patrols were holding the huge door to the palace open in the entrance hall. There was the blizzard outside, Ludwig noticed, and the snow was falling so thick he could scarcely see out of the doorway. Wind whistled outside, blowing at the flames on the chandelier and making Ludwig shudder. Faintly, through the white mist of snow, Ludwig could see a figure approaching. He was alone, unlike Krizina had been when she had first came to the palace. Ludwig was not quite sure how he had reached it, since he had not heard the sound of any aircraft approaching. The figure was a Koopa, who was dressed in a pure white suit and wore a white fedora with a purple band. The Koopa stepped through the doorway, took off his hat, shook off the wet droplets of melted snow, and placed it back onto his head.
"Hello, Ludwig,"
he said.
"I am Skalls Fortescue, the Purple Star."
There was something in Skal's blue eyes that Ludwig did not like. He was different from Krizina, who viewed everything with a sort of arrogant entitlement. There was no insecurity at all in Skal's expression, just complete confidence. This Koopa wasn't the kind of person who would act like the world belonged to him. He was the sort who acted the way he did because he knew the world belonged to him. He did not seem intimidated or impressed by the slightest by the fact that he was in the presence of the most powerful Koopaling, the Koopa who had raised a war that threatened Emperor Bowser himself. Ludwig instantly hated him even more than Krizina.
"A pleasure to meet you, Purple Star,"
Ludwig said with false politeness, extending his hand to Skalls. Skalls took Ludwig's claw in his much smaller hand and shook it.
"We have been watching your progress with some interest, Ludwig von Koopa,"
he said with a slight smile.
"My consolations on the loss of Neon City. It was a tragedy." "Think nothing of that."
Ludwig smiled, as if it really meant that little to him.
"The Neo Empire is still strong. Thanks to your group's generous contributions, the new weapons I have built are sure to lend us the victory over my father."
Skalls nodded.
"If only I could see them,"
he said.
"Unfortunately, I'm more here to speak to the Yellow Star here. Lady Krizina, would you?"
He gestured for Krizina to follow him down a side corridor.
"I will escort you to my apartment, Purple Star,"
Krizina said, completely forgetting about Ludwig.
"We can talk in private there."
Ludwig watched them leave, giving them a dark look. So he didn't even care about him? Ludwig shook his hand and walked back up the staircase away from the entrance hall. The 2 patrols shut the door behind him. So 7 Stars thought his palace was all right to use for a private meeting, did they? Well, he wouldn't stand for that. Naturally, he wasn't going to raise a fuss at the moment, but he was already formulating his plans to get rid of Krizina. He'd milk 7 Stars for all it was worth, and then he'd promptly dump her out of the palace. It was time to turn his mind to more important things. The plan he had thought up that involved Larry's spies. It was going to destroy all of his siblings' armies. He would seize the rest of the empire in one stroke. Krizina closed the door to her private apartment and locked it. The apartment was a comfortable, luxurious room, the walls a deep royal blue. There was fire burning in the marble fireplace, and placed before it were 2 blue couches with gold armrests. Skulls stood near one of the long windows near the bed, looking out into the snow.
You ought to know, Krizina, that the Silver Star's ship was attacked yesterday,
he said calmly. Krizina started.
That fool!
She hissed.
Snadlash was always careless. He was dealing with the Gumbinos, wasn't he? Those second-rate criminals should not be allowed to touch us. It wasn't the Gumbinos,
Skulls replied, shaking his head. He crossed his arms, still looking out into the whiteness outside of the window. The fire crackled in the room.
It was a group of figures, each one completely different. King K'rul of the Kremlings, who we believed was no longer a major player on any stage. Prince Peasley of the Bean Kingdom, who we believed died with his mother when the kingdom was destroyed. A Fire Bro and a Yoshi, who are complete unknowns. Somehow, they were able to hold their own against Snadlash despite the years of training he has underwent.
Krizina tightened her grip on her wand. She had never liked Snadlash. The Black Kremling had always seemed to have an unjustifiably high opinion of himself. He was weaker than she was, and much weaker than Skulls. But at the same time, the idea that a group composed of unknowns and has-beens had been strong enough to match him in combat was troublesome.
I want you to keep an eye on Ludwig,
Skulls said, his eyes still on the snow outside the window.
Inform me of any changes to his strategy. Everything must stay on track. I understand, Purple Star.
Krizina nodded.
What about the newcomers? Should I? I'll deal with them,
Skulls responded calmly.
The idea that Luigi is still alive, and the idea that there could be people this strong who are unaccounted for, is something we did not anticipate. If they are powerful enough to derail our plans, I am going to have to inform the Grand Star about this.
I see. Krizina nodded. She was unnerved by this news, but calmed herself as she looked at Skulls. The Koopa was cold and stoic like a statue, staring out at the snow. 7 stars could not be harmed by some simple, altruistic would-be heroes looking for a change in the order of things. It could be inconvenienced, set back even, but it would endure. Throughout all the conflicts of the Mushroom World, the Shroob invasion, the conflicts between Mario and Bowser, and the rise of the Koopa Empire, it had been in the shadows, waiting, working in secret, and moving towards their final, ultimate goal. She knew nothing could halt it now that it had begun to move. She almost felt pity for these people who had tried to go against the Silver Star. Snadlash was one thing, an arrogant, egotistical reptile who enjoyed the wealth and power being a member of the board of directors allowed. Skulls Fortescue, one of the 3 pillars of 7 stars, a Koopa who had played with the course of history, was something else entirely.